The UAE has ordered a fast-track expansion of a major west-east oil pipeline, a project designed to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely.
95% of Saudi Arabia is a burning desert, where the ground temperature can sometimes reach nearly 70 degrees Celsius. But in the middle of this seemingly uninhabitable land, they have built something impossible: an invisible river made of over 10,000 kilometers of steel pipelines, moving around 7.2 billion liters of water every single day. It is the largest, most expensive, and most complex water network ever built by humans. But how do you purify billions of liters of seawater, push it across scorching deserts, and pump it all the way up to hills nearly 10,000 feet high? What happens to the millions of tons of toxic salt left behind? And how does an entire country depend on a system like this to survive? To understand this, we need to start from the very question of why Saudi Arabia needed to build this system in the first place. The driest country. Saudi Arabia is one of the harshest places on Earth. More than 95% of the country is covered in desert, and some parts of it look almost lifeless from space. But the most terrifying part is not the sand. It is the lack of water. This is the largest country in the world without a single permanent river. Most of the water that exists naturally either appears for a short time after rare floods or sits trapped deep underground from ancient geological ages. And behind all of this extreme environment, the real problem is rain. In parts of the Rub al-Khali, also called the Empty Quarter, some regions can go nearly 10 years without a single drop of rainfall. This desert alone is larger than France. During summer, air temperatures regularly cross 45 degrees Celsius, but the ground itself can heat up to almost 70 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, a human body can begin suffering dangerous dehydration shock in less than an hour. Yet despite all of this, more than 37 million people live here. Riyadh alone grew from a relatively small desert city of around 150,000 people in the 1950s to more than 7.5 million today. Megacities, industries, farms, airports, entire economic zones, all rising in a country that was never meant to support this many people. For decades, Saudi Arabia tried to survive through underground aquifers. They pumped what is called fossil water, ancient groundwater trapped beneath the desert since the Ice Age. In the 1980s, they used so much of it for agricultural use that Saudi Arabia briefly became one of the world's largest wheat exporters. That water was not being replaced. It was like withdrawing money from a bank account with no deposits coming back in. And within just a few decades, the country drained nearly 80% of some of its ancient groundwater reserves. Because while the oil brought wealth and cities, it could not solve the problem of water itself. In fact, producing fresh water in Saudi Arabia became more expensive than producing oil itself. The nation, sitting on trillions of dollars worth of black gold, had become water poor. And this forced Saudi Arabia toward an idea that sounded almost insane. What if an entire country could survive by pulling water out of the sea? So, in 1974, Saudi Arabia officially began investing billions into a huge national desalination and pipeline system. Prince Mohammed bin Faisal, the first head of the SWCC, Saline Water Conversion Corporation, became so obsessed with solving the crisis that he once seriously discussed pulling an iceberg from Antarctica to Saudi Arabia. That idea sounded impossible, but what they eventually built was somehow even bigger. A giant hidden water network stretching across the desert like a national life support system. And it all began with enormous steel pipelines. Building the giant pipelines. A single pipe section can measure nearly 12 to 18 meters long and weigh up to 30 tons. That is almost the weight of a fully grown humpback whale. But ordinary steel pipes would never survive here. During the day, desert temperatures can climb above 50 degrees Celsius, then fall close to freezing during the night. That constant expansion and contraction slowly destroys weaker materials. The system pushes water under crushing pressure across massive distances, sometimes uphill through rough terrain. So Saudi Arabia turned to high-strength carbon steel, the same type of material used in oil and gas infrastructure. The walls of these pipes can reach 25 to even 40 millimeters thick, strong enough to resist nearly 80 bars of pressure, around 40 times the pressure inside a car tire. That's why building these pipes requires extreme precision. The process starts with giant rectangular steel plates arriving at massive factories. These plates are fed into huge 3-roll bending machines. Slowly, the flat steel begins curling inward until it forms a near-perfect circle. But shaping the steel is only the beginning. The open seam running across the pipe is then welded using submerged arc welding, a robotic system designed to create welds so strong that the seam itself can become stronger than the surrounding steel. On a pipe this large, even a 2-millimeter misalignment is considered failure, because such a tiny defect hidden inside that weld could become catastrophic once water pressure begins building inside the line. The inside of the pipe is coated with a smooth protective layer that keeps the drinking water clean and prevents rust from forming inside. Meanwhile, the outside is covered with a thick polyethylene layer that protects the steel from the salty desert soil, which can slowly corrode and destroy the pipe over time. And once completed, the pipes are moved into giant storage yards holding thousands of sections at once. But manufacturing these steel giants was still the easier part, because next came the real nightmare, getting them across the endless Saudi desert. Crossing the endless desert building. The pipelines was already an enormous challenge, but transporting and installing them across Saudi Arabia was something else entirely. Because this was not normal construction. Engineers were trying to drag thousands of tons of steel through one of the most hostile landscapes on Earth. Before the first trench could even be dug, survey teams spent months studying the desert using satellite mapping, GPS systems, and LiDAR scanning. They were not simply searching for flat land. They were searching for stable ground hidden beneath the sand, because laying a giant water pipeline on shifting dunes would be a disaster. Over time, the sand would move, and the pipe would slowly sink and bend under the heavy weight of water inside. So the route had to be almost surgically planned. Then came the construction corridors. Across the desert, crews built temporary pathways nearly 40 meters wide, wider than many city roads. These giant corridors acted like moving industrial highways, where excavators, cranes, bulldozers, welders, and transport trucks could operate side by side without sinking into the sand. And once the route was locked in, the desert itself had to be opened. Massive excavators began cutting trenches, often reaching 4 to 5 meters deep, nearly the height of a small house. It also shielded the water from the brutal desert heat above, because near the surface, temperatures could turn the pipeline into a giant oven. But underground, conditions stayed far more stable. Then the project hit the Hijaz Mountains, and at that point, digging was no longer enough. Construction teams had to use controlled explosions to break through solid granite rock, cutting paths through mountains that had existed for almost 500 million years. After excavation, workers spread soft, screened sand along the trench floor, creating a protective cushion for the pipeline. Without this layer, sharp desert rock could slowly damage the outer coating and expose the steel underneath. Then came one of the most dangerous stages of all. Entire sections of welded pipe, sometimes over 100 meters long, were lifted by groups of giant side-boom tractors, moving together like perfectly timed machines. If even one operator moved too early or too late, the pipe could bend and crack from the inside before it ever carried a single drop of water. And through all of this, there was another invisible enemy constantly threatening the project: sand. Even a single grain blowing into a weld could ruin the entire joint. During strong winds and storms, workers often had to build sealed tents around pipe sections just to continue welding safely. So the work never truly stopped. But after thousands of kilometers of buried steel, there was still one massive question left. Where would all this water actually come from? The start of everything. After crossing mountains, trenches, and endless desert, the entire system finally reaches the place where everything begins: the sea. Because without the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia's giant water network would simply not exist. The water is not taken near the shoreline. That water is too warm, too dirty, and filled with sand, algae, and coastal debris. So engineers extend the intake lines hundreds of meters farther into the sea, where the water is deeper, colder, and much cleaner. Even building these underwater systems is a massive engineering operation on its own. Before the pipes can be installed, giant dredging ships dig long trenches into the seabed. In some places, they even hit coral and hard underwater rock, forcing crews to use powerful cutting machines just to clear a path. Then, the intake sections are lowered carefully, using heavy lift cranes mounted on large floating platforms and offshore structures. So engineers surround many sections with huge concrete weight blocks designed to pin them to the seabed. Then comes one of the most delicate stages. Divers and remotely operated underwater vehicles worked in dark, murky water, connecting each section one by one. Every seal needed to be nearly perfect. Even a tiny gap could let sand and silt enter the system. And once that happens, it can destroy multi-million-dollar filtration membranes inside the plant. But even after installation, the fight doesn't stop, because the ocean keeps trying to take over the system. Barnacles, mussels, algae, and marine growth can slowly clog the intake lines within weeks. To prevent this, engineers use electrochlorination systems that treat the surrounding water and stop sea life from attaching to the pipes. At the same time, they must also protect marine life itself. Special intake heads called velocity caps pull water in gently from the sides instead of forcefully sucking it downward. And once the seawater finally enters the plant, that's where the real challenge begins. Turning salty ocean water into safe drinking water for millions of people required one of the most expensive purification systems ever built. The distribution. Once the water is clean, it has to be delivered to cities, farms, and industries spread across thousands of kilometers of desert. And this is where the system becomes almost like a living machine. At the center of it is a massive digital control network called SCADA, a system that monitors and controls the entire water network. From huge control rooms, engineers watch the country's water flow in real time. Even a small leak hundreds of miles away can be detected instantly. Saudi Arabia also uses advanced digital twin systems. These are virtual copies of the entire pipeline network. They allow engineers to test situations before they happen. For example, if a sandstorm damages a pumping station, the system can instantly suggest new routes to keep water flowing. And to push water across this massive distance, The system relies on extremely powerful pumping stations. Across the country, huge underground reservoirs act like backup storage. These massive concrete tanks can hold millions of cubic meters of water, designed to keep cities like Riyadh running even if coastal plants stop for days. So, engineers add special chemical drag reducers that make the water flow more smoothly. This allows water to travel faster, farther, and with less energy loss. Now, all of this connects one idea: a hidden river beneath the desert, constantly moving, constantly working, keeping an entire nation alive. But even this system is not the final stage, because Saudi Arabia is already planning what comes next. What's coming next? Even after building one of the most advanced water systems on Earth, Saudi Arabia is not slowing down. In fact, it is trying to completely change how survival works in a desert. The next big shift is energy. Right now, a huge amount of electricity is still needed to turn seawater into fresh water. But that is changing fast. New projects are moving towards solar and wind power, using the desert's strongest advantage: endless sunlight and open land. Plants like Al-Kafji are already testing large-scale solar desalination. The goal is simple: stop depending on oil and let the sun itself power the water supply. Then comes Neom, and this is where things start to look like the future. In Neom City, engineers are planning zero-waste water systems. The idea is not just to make fresh water, but to make sure nothing is thrown away. Even the leftover salty brine will be reused to extract valuable minerals like lithium and magnesium. Instead of treating waste as a problem, they are turning it into resources. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is moving towards something even more powerful: AI-controlled water systems. In the future, smart sensors and digital systems will track every drop of water in real time. AI will predict demand, detect leaks instantly, and adjust pumping systems before problems even begin. And behind all of this, the scale keeps growing. More than $80 billion are being invested in thousands of water projects. The goal is not just to supply cities, but to support a population moving toward 40 million people and beyond. Through thousands of kilometers of steel pipes, billions of liters of seawater, and strong human effort, Saudi Arabia has achieved something that once felt impossible. It has separated its survival from rainfall. This is no longer just a pipeline system. It is a clear message, a sign that even the harshest environment can be changed when a nation puts its full strength, money, and science into one clear goal. So, what do you think about all this? Has Saudi Arabia solved one of humanity's oldest challenges, or could this solution create even bigger problems in the decades ahead? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we'll be uploading more incredible stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya.